Have you personally had any dark nights of the soul?
Thousands of them, of course. I think every time we make a decision, I think from the first personal perspective, every time you make a decision, you really do feel like, and the best phrase that I've found for kind of capturing the phenomenology of it, though in some sense language feels inadequate here, is William James's phrase when he says, you know, what one feels when one's making a decision. And in particular, in those times when you feel like, you're making a really pivotal decision, like, do I accept the job over here or do I stay where I am? Do I get married? Do I not? Do I have a child? Do I not? Or do I let, a partner walk out the door and close the door on a relationship or not? Where it feels really pivotal. William James says, about, I think he's trying to capture these sorts of moments when he says, when you feel that the scales of fate hang in the balance and it all comes down to the here and now. I think for me, it was, have many experiences like that. That's why we torture ourselves over difficult decisions, because you feel in those moments that the future is really hinging, on sort of what I do in the here and now.
You said language feels inadequate here. Do you think it's the case that there are problems of existential import, that the limitation of language isn't just a limitation of current language or current models, but maybe a limitation of any model or any language?
Yes. So you're putting your finger on a really difficult question. So I think, language is an interpersonal medium of communication. It's there precisely to allow the flow of information between different subjectivities, between my mind and your mind. And in order to do that, it has to be objective in a very particular sense. It has to be objective in the sense that it has to detach from sort of features of my experience that are that you don't have, like. Do you see what I mean? So I can understand things in a way that it, attaches directly to features of my experience that I can, as it were, display in thought. You don't have that. It's like, it's like sort of if I'm in one part of space and you're in another part of space, you're using a map and I'm using a map. The map is supposed to be the kind of, embodiment of objective relations between locations in space, ways of representing things that don't depend specifically on how I'm related to them. Right. So the map is the embodiment of that objective relations, invariant objective relations between events that are invariant under transformations between spatial locations. Sort of frame independent. So if you're in one part of space, I'm in one part of space. We don't want to use words like near and far because the meaning of those words depends on where the speaker is located. Right. So if you're in Canada, I'm here, and you say, what's nearby? And I say, oh, the store is a mile away. And just go down the road, go to the right. That's not going to mean much to you because you're in a different part of space. It's not going to be a useful way of speaking. So that's why we have things like maps. Language is like that. It lets us communicate with one another in ways that detach from specificities of our situation.
So we are going to get to self-location and indexicals and also the definition of free will and perhaps even definitions of free will, as there are multiple. Before we do, broadly speaking, you were talking about attraction earlier. There are two types of philosophers. And again, this is a broad generalization. One that goes into problems where they feel they already have a handle on it and they feel like other people find so-and-so confounding, but they don't. And then there's another that are sadistically drawn to being bewildered by a mystery, regardless of if it's considered even to be a solved problem or not. You strike me as the mystery sort. I don't know if that's the case. Let me know.
100%. So I think I make a lunge for the mysteries. Like the things that I think I understand, I don't tend to get interested in, or as soon, this is what makes me a person who doesn't write very much, is because as soon as I think I do understand something, or like many of the problems in physics is, I don't understand it in detail, but I don't see a mystery there. Sort of that's a problem that will yield to, a little bit more calculation or filling it, like the contours are there. I don't see. So it is the places where absolutely that I feel a real mystery, like a confounding one, the kinds of problems where if you think about them, I don't, because of the current way that I think about things, I don't see any way through it. That means seeing my way through it, I'm going to learn something deep. I'm going to have to change something in the way that I think. So, but it doesn't mean like I approach them with the conviction that I'm going to understand them. It's much more kind of visceral than that. I think it's just I'm interested in and attracted to mysteries.
You're just compelled.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. And I'll say one more thing, which is I always tell my students this, which is the way that you're going to make a contribution is not that you have more brain power, but that you're more patient with certain sorts of problems. So focus on the problems that interest you, because you're going to be more patient with those problems. And I think I have like this great tolerance for being confused. And I sort of really like the things that confuse me. And
what else do you tell your students as advice?
One is, I think, people imagine. So what they do is they go into graduate school and they imagine, sort of they're the people that they think of as either in the field, like sort of professional examples, or people among their peers that they think of, oh, that person is clearly the smartest, they think the fastest, they calculate the best. And all of the cool kids are working on these problems. So what I have to try to do is emulate that. I have to get as good as I have to work on those problems, because those are like the hardcore problems. I have to, sort of try to be what they are. Those are the paradigms of kind of a successful philosopher. That's exactly wrong. So, once you're in the field, that when you're sort of choosing who to read or you're choosing who to hire, you always say, oh, you don't say, oh, good, this person kind of, in the ordinary kind of pecking order comes like, high enough to the top. You say, who's doing something different? Who's doing something interesting? Who are the really interesting people? And even when you're choosing who to read, I think, once you get to a certain level of proficiency, you're not looking for more of the same. You're not looking for, kind of who are working on the old problems and saying the smartest things about them. You're learning for something who's doing something a little different, coming from a different angle, combining approaches in a way that is, sort of going to yield something new. And I think physicists think this way. It's a kind of complex, rugged landscape. And, sort of if you've got people starting in different areas and coming from different approaches, you're going to explore more of the landscape jointly.
As a hirer, as someone who's hiring, how do you avoid this self-reinforcing mechanism of, okay, you are championing theory A, and whatever is adjacent to theory A, but my student has an idea about not even theory B, theory not A, like the opposite of theory A. Why would you, as a supervisor or as someone on a hiring committee, why would you put any eggs in that basket? Now, I was speaking to Susskind and to Sean Carroll about how string theory in the early 2000s and 90s was extremely dominant in theoretical physics. And they just said, well, one of the reasons is simply, why would you attach yourself to something that you don't believe in? So if they're a string theorist, they believe in string theory. And if a student is coming with some other radical proposal, well, they're like, I'm sorry, I don't think that's going to work. It seems quite clear to me at this current time, given current evidence, etc., that quantum gravity is synonymous with string theory, and string theory is the way to go. So how do you avoid that, and how do you think about that?
So I'll tell you how I think about it. It's something I come up against a lot. So I'm on one side of this. I'll tell you what I think about it, and I'll use the foil of people on hiring committees that I'm tending to argue against about this. So I think in philosophy, it's a little bit different than physics. So in physics, you think there is a truth, and you're committed to the truth, and you want the field not to be looking in areas, that are kind of, you think are dead ends. In philosophy, it's a little, people are working on problems. They recognize there's a number views, and you're looking to build a department that, is able to teach students, and where collectively, but what people do is they take their set of views, and in particular, I think their style of doing philosophy. So, I'm an analytic philosopher. I think like the height of intellectual achievement or intellectual prowess is exhibited in whether you can do logic or the careful analysis. I think a good paper looks like this. It involves a lot of careful analysis. Other people on other sides, no, I think it's about insight and intuition, and somebody has a new idea, but they're not writing these tightly packaged, fussy little papers. So the way that I think about that is you need all kinds. The insight comes from different areas and different approaches. So I absolutely believe in diversity. There are these theorems that show, like, effectively, if you've got, n number of people at the table, but they're all kind of, proficient in one way of approaching things, or they all have the same sort of expertise, brain power, you increase the quality of the group for solving problems, not by just adding more of who you think are the smartest people, but by adding people who are doing different approaches, different things, even if, person by person, they're kind of lower quality thinking. So I think that's true in philosophy. I think you want a diversity, but you come up against colleagues who are doing the philosophical equivalent of your friends who are choosing string theorists because they think that's the going theory, which is, we want smart people. Smart people do philosophy like this. And I'm looking out there, and, you're giving me someone who's kind of a foggy thinker. The analytic stuff isn't there. And I feel like, no, that's completely the wrong approach. If you're using your standards of the right way to do philosophy as the criterion of what a good philosopher is, you're going to just hire more of yourself. And as a group, you're going to be weaker, and the refusal to recognize that kind of humility, not to recognize that insight comes from a number of places. And I think the analogy that I like to use is, it's as though even, we've got it's as though, I'm not going to sort of be personal about it, but it's as though you've got a lot of people who are trained at Oxford, and they're really, really good at kind of analysis, and they recognize what a tightly argued, paper looks like. And that's, for them, the height of philosophy. And you're bringing in people from other traditions that are doing, sort of existentialism or continental philosophy. What I would think of, I'm always willing to say, it's rich with insight. Let's plunder it for what we can take. But they're like, that's clearly not good philosophy. I mean, look at this, right?
It's not well defined.
It's not analytically carefully argued. It's not, embedded in a lot of, sort of what
hand wavy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a bunch of French chefs standing in a corner when somebody's bringing in, tacos and from a different tradition, and they're going, oh, like the knife work is very bad, or like, do you see what I mean? It's
yeah.
So I think, that how I approach it is, I tell students, follow where your nose takes you. You lean into your own talents, and see, if you can come up with something new and something different and something helpful to, sort of the problems that you're interested in.
Just a moment. Don't go anywhere. Hey, I see you inching away. Don't be like The Economy. Instead, read The Economist. I thought all The Economist was something that CEOs read to stay up to date on world trends. And that's true, but that's not only true. What I found more than useful for myself personally is their coverage of math, physics, philosophy, and AI, especially how something is perceived by other countries and how it may impact markets. For instance, The Economist had an interview with some of the people behind DeepSeek the week DeepSeek was launched. No one else had that. Another example is The Economist has this fantastic article on the recent dark energy data, which surpasses even Scientific American's coverage, in my opinion. They also have the chart of everything. It's like the chart version of this channel. It's something which is a pleasure to scroll through and learn from. Links to all of these will be in the description, of course. Now, The Economist's commitment to rigorous journalism means that you get a clear picture of the world's most significant developments. I am personally interested in the more scientific ones, like this one on extending life via mitochondrial transplants, which creates actually a new field of medicine, something that would make Michael Levin proud. The Economist also covers culture, finance and economics, business, international affairs, Britain, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, China, Asia, the Americas, and of course, the USA. Whether it's the latest in scientific innovation or the shifting landscape of global politics, The Economist provides comprehensive coverage, and it goes far beyond just headlines. Look, if you're passionate about expanding your knowledge and gaining a new understanding, a deeper one, of the forces that shape our world, then I highly recommend subscribing to The Economist. I subscribe to them, and it's an investment into your intellectual growth. It's one that you won't regret. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get a special 20% off discount. Now you can enjoy The Economist and all it has to offer for less. Head over to their website, www.economist.com/toe, TOE, to get started. Thanks for tuning in, and now let's get back to the exploration of the mysteries of our universe. Again, that's economist.com/toe.